A waste collector was humiliated in the middle of the street by wealthy people who thought they were superior. But a millionaire saw the scene and noticed something that no one else had the courage to see. What he discovered about that simple woman changed everything around them. If this beautiful story of overcoming and love interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you are watching us from. Continuing, the 7 o'clock morning sun was already burning hot when Sarah Miller pushed her cart down Chestnut Street in the heart of the Beacon Hill neighborhood in Boston. The glistening asphalt still held traces of the dawn rain, but the moisture was already evaporating in small clouds of steam that rose from the ground like transparent ghosts. She knew every inch of that route, like someone who has memorized a map of their own life. She knew where the sidewalk rose, where the curb was broken, and where the residents left their trash bags even before the scheduled time. She also knew where the look of contempt was, the low comment, the wrinkled nose even before she approached. Sarah wasn't old, but life had taken a greater toll on her than the 42 years marked on her ID. She had calloused hands, a back that ached at the end of the day, skin darkened by the sun and hair tied in a tight bun that never came undone, even when the wind insisted. She wore a worn-out orange uniform, black rubber boots, and an expression she had learned to control over the years. It wasn't submission, nor was it revolt. It was something in between, a light mask of voluntary invisibility, as if she understood that the less space she occupied in others' field of vision, the fewer problems she would have. But inside, Sarah was an entire universe. She stopped in front of the Acacia Tower, one of the most luxurious buildings in the area, all clad in mirrored glass and imported granite. Outside, 3 black trash bags rested against the gleaming stainless steel bin that was never used for its actual purpose. Sarah bent down, tied the bags carefully, and lifted them into her cart, feeling the familiar weight on her shoulders. That was when she heard a high-pitched voice coming from the lobby. "Miss, can you do that faster? The people in the building complain that the smell lingers in the hall." Sarah looked up. It was a young employee, dressed in an impeccable uniform, who avoided looking directly at her while speaking. There was no anger in the girl's voice, only automatic obedience to an order that had certainly come from someone high up, from an apartment where the air conditioning kept the temperature perfect and where no one ever touched their own trash. "I'm almost finished," Sarah replied, her voice low, almost a whisper. It wasn't out of fear, but out of economy. She knew that any extra word could turn into a reason for trouble, and trouble meant losing her job. Losing her job meant not paying the rent. Not paying the rent meant going back to where she had come from, and she would never allow that again. She continued pushing the cart, the metallic rattle of the wheels echoing in the empty street. She passed by the Daily Crust bakery, where the aroma of fresh coffee and toasted bread escaped through the half-open door. 2 elegant women were talking outside, holding porcelain cups and laughing at something Sarah couldn't hear. As she approached, one of them discreetly stepped away like someone avoiding touching a dirty wall. The other didn't even notice, or pretended not to. Sarah kept walking as she always did. She picked up the trash bag left next to the green bin and moved on. Further ahead, in front of the elegant salon, a young woman with platinum blonde hair threw an empty nail polish bottle on the ground, right next to where Sarah had just cleaned. She did this without looking back while answering her cell phone and laughing loudly at some private joke. Sarah stopped, took a deep breath and bent down to pick up the bottle. She said nothing. She never did. She simply tucked the small plastic bottle inside the larger bag and continued her way. The routine repeated itself with surgical precision, as if everything there was part of a theater where she played the role of an invisible extra. But Sarah kept everything. She kept the gestures, the words, the silences. She kept them because she knew that one day it would all make sense, even if she didn't know how yet. At noon, when the sun was at its highest and the street began to empty because of the heat, Sarah stopped under an old oak tree to drink water. She sat on the edge of the sidewalk, took a worn-out thermos from her frayed backpack, and took 3 slow sips. That was when she saw the scene. A small boy, about 5 or 6 years old, was walking alone on the sidewalk, crying softly while holding a faded teddy bear. He seemed lost, turning his head from side to side like someone looking for someone. Sarah stood up, wiped her hands on her uniform pants and approached slowly, crouching down to the boy's height. "Hi, sweetie. Are you lost?" The boy wiped his face with the back of his hand and nodded. Yes, his eyes red and frightened. Sarah reached out her hand but without touching him, just indicating she was there to help. "What is your mother's name?" "Emily." "And where was she when you got lost?" The boy pointed in the opposite direction, toward the wooded square at the end of the street. Sarah stood up, took the boy's small, warm hand, and began walking with him. It didn't take long before they heard a desperate voice calling, "Leo! Leo, my son!" A woman in a light dress and high sandals was running down the sidewalk, her eyes searching frantically. When she saw the boy holding Sarah's hand, she stopped for a moment, her eyes moving from the collector's orange clothes to her son, as if calculating whether she should feel fear or relief. Relief won. "Leo, my God, thank you so much." She took her son in her arms and looked at Sarah with sincerity. It was a quick look, but a true one. There was no contempt, no suspicion, only human gratitude. "You're welcome, ma'am." He was alone there near the square. "I was worried." The woman nodded, still pressing the boy against her chest. She seemed to want to say something more, but hesitated. Sarah understood the silence. She knew that any longer conversation there in front of other people might embarrass the woman, so she just smiled lightly and went back to her cart. She didn't expect recognition. She didn't expect anything. She just did what she thought was right. The rest of the day followed as usual. More trash, more streets, more looks that went through her as if she were transparent. In the late afternoon, when the sun began to set and the light turned golden, Sarah stopped in front of an overflowing bin near the Acacia Bistro. Among empty bottles and crumpled napkins, she saw something that caught her attention. It was a notebook. It wasn't very dirty, just wet on the edge. The cover was light blue with drawings of clouds. Sarah picked it up carefully, shook it lightly, and opened it. The first pages were scribbled with children's drawings, but then, right in the middle, there were blank pages. Many blank pages. She looked around as if someone might be watching and tucked the notebook inside her backpack. She didn't know what she was going to use it for yet, but she knew that waste was something that didn't sit well with her. If it had a use, it deserved to be saved. When she returned home, it was almost night. She lived in a small room in the back of an old house in the Dorchester neighborhood, on the other side of the city. She shared the bathroom with 3 other people and cooked on a single-burner electric stove. But it was hers. She owed no favors to anyone, didn't depend on any man, and didn't have to accept insults in silence. Inside there, in that cramped and simple space, she was free. Sarah took a long shower, letting the warm water wash away the exhaustion and the smell of the day. Afterward, she put on an old t-shirt and sweatpants, sat on the edge of the bed and took out the notebook she had found. She opened it to a blank page, took the blue pen she kept in the drawer, and began to write. It wasn't anything sophisticated, just loose phrases, thoughts that came to her while walking the streets, things that no one would ever know if she didn't put them on paper. "Today a woman looked at me like I was a person. It was only for a second, but it was worth it. Some people throw trash on the ground even after seeing that I just finished cleaning. I think it's to remind me that they can." The little boy wasn't afraid of me. Children haven't learned yet that being poor is something to be afraid of. She wrote until her hand grew tired. Then she closed the notebook, tucked it under her pillow, and turned off the light. She lay on her side, looking at the peeling wall where she had taped a photo cut out from a magazine. It was a beach with blue water and white sand. She had never been to the sea, but she liked to imagine that one day she would. She liked to imagine that one day many things would be different. But for now, tomorrow would be the same as today. Waking up before the sun, putting on the orange uniform, pushing the cart through the same streets, collecting the trash that others produced without thinking, and remaining invisible. Sarah closed her eyes, but before sleeping she whispered a phrase softly, as if making a promise to herself. "I am not what they see. I am what I know I am." And that night, it was enough for her to rest in peace. The next day everything started again. The sun burned again, the streets filled again, the looks turned away again. Sarah pushed her cart down the same chestnut street, collecting the same bags, hearing the same veiled comments. But something was different. She didn't know it yet, but at that exact moment, someone was watching. Someone who didn't look away, someone who, for the first time, decided to see. And when Marcus Sterling's eyes landed on the figure of that woman in the orange uniform crossing the street with the heavy cart, he didn't feel contempt. He felt curiosity. He felt discomfort. He felt that something there wasn't right, and that, without either of them knowing it yet, would change everything. Marcus Sterling wasn't used to paying attention to small details. His life was made of strategic meetings, million-dollar negotiations, and decisions that moved entire markets. At 47 years old, he commanded one of the largest construction companies in Massachusetts, had offices in 3 major cities, and a name that opened doors in any circle. He frequented the same restaurants, knew the same people, and moved through the same places where everything was predictably impeccable. Until that Thursday morning, when something off-script captured his attention. He was stopped at the traffic light on the corner of Chestnut Street and Commonwealth Avenue, waiting for the light to change, when he saw the scene through his car window. A woman in an orange uniform was pushing a trash cart, walking slowly along the curb. Nothing extraordinary about that. But what caught Marcus's attention wasn't her presence, but the absence of any gaze upon her. 2 elegant women were talking on the sidewalk right next to her, and when the collector passed, one of them took a step back, like someone avoiding stepping in a dirty puddle. The other simply continued talking, without interrupting her sentence, as if the worker were part of the landscape. Something inanimate, without voice or face. Marcus frowned. It wasn't compassion he felt, at least not at that first moment. It was strangeness, as if something were wrong in that invisible equation, in that silent pact where everyone agreed not to see. The light changed, and he moved on. But the scene remained stuck in his memory like a fine splinter under the skin. In the following days, without planning to, Marcus began to notice more. He always returned from the office by the same route, and he always saw the same woman in the orange uniform, pushing the cart through the streets of Beacon Hill. He began to notice the pattern. She wasn't treated with common indifference. She was treated with something worse, with active contempt, with a feigned polite disgust. One morning, while having coffee at the Acacia Bistro, Marcus saw the collector approach the sidewalk in front of the restaurant. She was collecting trash from the outdoor tables when a man in an expensive grey suit gestured impatiently to the waiter. Marcus couldn't hear what was said, but he saw the waiter run out to the woman and ask, with hurried gestures, for her to move away. The reason was clear. Her presence, according to the customer, was disturbing his breakfast. Sarah didn't argue. She just nodded that she understood, finished tying the bag she was holding, and moved away with the cart, leaving part of the work unfinished. Marcus felt something rise in his throat. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was contained indignation. He paid the bill quickly and left, but the woman had already turned the corner. It was at the end of that same week that he witnessed the most brutal scene yet. It was Saturday morning, and he had gone to pick up some documents at the office. He was driving down Walnut Street when he saw a crowd of people on the sidewalk. He slowed down, curious. In the center of the group was the collector, standing next to her cart, while 2 private security guards from a luxury condominium searched her backpack. She didn't react. She just waited, her arms crossed at chest level, her face impassive. Marcus pulled over and got out, approaching slowly. He managed to hear the conversation. "A resident complained that you were loitering around the building outside of hours," said one of the guards, a tall man with tattooed arms. "We need to check." "I just work here," Sarah replied, her voice low but firm. "I collect trash. I'm not doing anything wrong. We're just following orders, miss. Don't take it personally." The search continued. They opened the backpack, turned it upside down and scattered everything on the ground. A water bottle, a lunchbox, a worn-out sweater, the blue notebook that Sarah had found and kept so carefully. One of the guards picked up the notebook, flipped through it quickly and threw it back on the ground with contempt. They found nothing, of course, because there was nothing to find. But the humiliation was already done. Marcus felt the anger heat up, not because of the search itself, but because of the way it was done, because of the audience that watched without moving a muscle, because of the people who passed by looking sideways, shaking their heads with an air of confirmation, as if it were natural, expected, deserved, and mainly because of Sarah's own look. It wasn't of anger. It wasn't of shame. It was of profound exhaustion of someone who already expected this and knew that shouting wouldn't change anything. When the guards released Sarah and she bent down to gather her things, Marcus took a step forward. He didn't know what he was going to say, but he knew he needed to say something. But before he could open his mouth, Sarah looked up and met his eyes. It was a 1-second look, but loaded with meaning. It wasn't a plea for help. It was almost a warning. Don't get involved. You don't belong in this. Marcus stopped. He took a deep breath, and he stayed where he was, watching as she finished putting everything away, picked up the cart and moved forward, pushing the weight as if nothing had happened. The people around dispersed quickly, returning to their impeccable lives, and Marcus stood there, stationary on the sidewalk, feeling for the first time in his life that perhaps there were things his money and position couldn't buy, like, for example, the dignity of that woman. That night Marcus couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about her look, the impossible calm in the face of humiliation, the way no one intervened. He also thought about himself. How many times had he passed by similar scenes and simply ignored them? How many times had he been part of that theater of indifference? He decided he needed to understand better, not out of charity, not out of guilt, but because something in that whole story was wrong, and he could no longer pretend he didn't see it. He began to observe, discreetly, without approaching, without intervening, just observing. He started parking his car in strategic places, having coffee at specific times, walking the streets of Beacon Hill as if he were just enjoying the day. And the more he observed, the more he saw. He saw Sarah being pushed aside by a woman coming out of a designer clothing store, carrying huge bags. The woman didn't even apologize. She just kept walking, talking on the phone, as if she had bumped into a tree. He saw a group of wealthy teenagers taking photos of her secretly, laughing softly as they shared the image in some private group. Sarah noticed he was sure of it, but she said nothing. She just kept working. He saw a rideshare driver curse at her for having placed the cart too close to the car, even though there was plenty of space and she had every right to be there. He saw a resident throw trash directly on the ground, seconds after Sarah had cleaned the sidewalk, just for the perverse pleasure of reaffirming some kind of invisible power. But he also saw other things, things that no one else paid attention to. He saw Sarah return a wallet that had fallen from a distracted elderly lady's purse. The lady took it back without thanking her, just quickly checking if the money was still there, as if she were suspicious. He saw Sarah help an elderly man cross the street, holding his arm gently while the light flashed red. He saw Sarah carefully separate recyclables, even when no one asked, just because she thought it was the right thing to do. And he saw Sarah write. Yes, write. One late afternoon, while waiting for her shift to end, she sat under a tree, took out that worn blue notebook, and began to jot something down. Marcus was too far away to read, but he could see the concentration on her face, the way she held the pen, the posture of someone who was creating something important. It was at that moment that Marcus understood. That woman wasn't just a humiliated worker. She was a complete person, with thoughts, dreams, her own dignity, and a silent strength that no one around her could recognize. And the more he saw this, the more he felt ashamed. Ashamed to be part, even if by omission, of that rotten system that turned human beings into disposable objects. On a Tuesday afternoon, Marcus gathered his courage and approached. Sarah was collecting trash in front of a newsstand when he stopped beside her. "Excuse me," he said, his voice polite but hesitant. Sarah looked up, suspicious. She recognized the man. She had seen him around a few times, always well-dressed, always observing. She didn't know if he was just another curious person or if he was trouble. She decided to respond with caution. "Yes, I saw what happened the other day, with the guards. I wanted to say that I thought it was wrong." Sarah remained silent for a few seconds, analyzing him. It wasn't common for someone from that circle to say something like that. She suspected it was a prank, or worse, someone wanting to feel better about themselves at her expense. "You don't need to worry about that, sir," she replied, her voice neutral. "It's over. But it shouldn't have happened." A lot of things shouldn't happen, but they do. Marcus felt the weight of the answer. It wasn't rudeness. It was just raw realism, coming from someone who had already learned not to expect anything from anyone. "May I ask your name?" Sarah hesitated. She looked around, checking if anyone was seeing this strange conversation. Then she answered, almost in a whisper. "Sarah." "Marcus," he returned, extending his hand. Sarah looked at the extended hand, then at her own hands dirty with trash. Marcus noticed and shook his head. "It's no problem." She didn't shake his hand. She just nodded her head slightly and went back to work. Marcus got the message. He didn't insist. He just nodded back and walked away. But in that brief encounter, something had changed. Sarah now knew that someone was seeing, and Marcus now knew that he could no longer pretend he didn't see. The truth, however, was much bigger than either of them imagined, and it was about to explode in a way no one expected. Monday dawned with a heavy sky, the kind of morning that promises rain but doesn't deliver. Sarah started her shift earlier than usual, wanting to get ahead of the work before the heat became unbearable. She was collecting trash in front of Pine Manor Residences, one of the most luxurious buildings in all of Beacon Hill, when something caught her attention. Among empty bottles of expensive wine and cardboard boxes from designer stores, there was a brown envelope, somewhat crumpled but still sealed. Sarah looked around, checking if anyone was watching, and picked up the envelope carefully. There was nothing written on the outside, just a red seal with gold initials that she didn't recognize. She opened it slowly, just to check if it was something important that had been discarded by mistake. Inside, there were documents. Many documents, contracts, printed emails, spreadsheets with very high values, and signatures she couldn't completely decipher. But even without understanding all the details, Sarah realized that this wasn't common trash. It was something serious, something that someone would certainly come looking for. She closed the envelope quickly and tucked it inside her backpack, deciding she would hand it in at the building's front desk as soon as she finished that street's route. She didn't want trouble. She didn't want to be accused of anything. She just wanted to do the right thing. But the right thing in that place had a price that was too high. Sarah had no idea that the envelope had been discarded on purpose. She didn't know that the man who owned those documents, Richard Vance, one of the most influential businessmen in Boston, was trying to destroy evidence of a corruption scheme involving multi-million-dollar contracts with the city. She didn't know that he had paid someone to get rid of it discreetly, away from cameras and witnesses. And she didn't know that, by picking up that envelope, she had just walked into a deadly trap. Sarah finished the collection on that street and went back to the lobby of Pine Manor. The doorman, a middle-aged man with a surly expression, barely looked up when she approached. "Hi, good morning. I found this in the trash out front. I think someone threw it away by mistake. Can you return it to the owner?" The doorman took the envelope, looked at it quickly, and frowned. He seemed to recognize something, but said nothing. He just nodded yes, and made a gesture with his hand for Sarah to leave. "Leave it here. I'll handle it." Sarah left relieved, thinking she had done her part. She went back to her cart and moved on to the next street, without imagining the hell that was about to break loose over her head. Half an hour later, while working on Charles Street, Sarah heard the sound of sirens. She turned and saw 2 city police cars stopping right next to her cart. 4 officers got out, all with serious expressions. One of them, the tallest, came straight toward her. "Are you Sarah Miller?" Sarah felt her heart race. She nodded yes, not understanding anything. "We need to search your backpack. There has been a report of theft." "Theft? I didn't steal anything." "That's what we're going to check." The officers took her backpack without ceremony and began to search it. Sarah looked around. People were already stopping to watch. Residents, shopkeepers, pedestrians, all looking, all judging. She felt her face burn with shame, but she stood still, quiet, trying to control her breathing. "Where is the envelope?" asked one of the officers, turning the backpack upside down and scattering everything on the ground. "What envelope?" "The envelope with documents that you took from the trash at Pine Manor Residences. I returned it. I took it to the front desk." "That's not what the doorman said. He claims you never returned anything." Sarah felt the ground disappear. It wasn't possible. She had handed it over. She had seen the man take the envelope from her hand. How could he deny it? "I swear I returned it." "Ask him again. He took it from me." "You're going to have to come with us to the station to provide a statement." That was when Sarah understood. It wasn't a mistake. It was a setup. Someone had orchestrated the whole thing to frame her. And the worst part was that no one there was going to believe her word against the word of a doorman at a luxury building. "I didn't do anything wrong," she repeated, her voice trembling now, not from fear but from contained revolt. "Then there won't be a problem with you accompanying us." Sarah was about to respond when she heard a familiar voice cutting through the silence. "Wait." Everyone turned. Marcus Sterling was walking toward the group with firm steps, his face serious. He had seen everything from a distance. He was driving past when he noticed the commotion. He stopped immediately and got out to understand what was happening. "Who are you, sir?" asked the tall officer. "Marcus Sterling." And I know this woman. She is not a thief. With all due respect, sir, you were not present at the time of the alleged theft. We have a formal complaint. A complaint from whom? The officer hesitated. He checked the paper he was holding and answered. From the board president of Pine Manor Residences, Richard Vance. Marcus felt everything click into place. Richard Vance. One of the most powerful men in the neighborhood, but also one of the dirtiest. Marcus had already heard rumors about him. Overpriced contracts, bribes, political favors. If Sarah had found something compromising in his trash, the setup made perfect sense. I would like to accompany this proceeding, Marcus said, his voice firm. As a witness. Witness to what? You didn't see anything. I saw her working honestly every day, and I know this accusation makes no sense at all. The officer looked at his colleague, then at Sarah, then at Marcus. He was visibly uncomfortable. This was going off script. Look, sir, with all due respect, we are just following orders. If you want to follow us, you can go to the station, but the lady has to come with us. Marcus was about to insist when Sarah interrupted him. It's okay. I'll go. I have nothing to hide. She looked at Marcus with an expression that mixed gratitude and resignation. She thanked him for the attempted help, but she knew this was bigger than any of them. She knew she had been chosen as a scapegoat, and she knew that, in a world where her word was worth less than nothing, there was no point in shouting. Marcus saw Sarah being placed inside the police car. The scene was grotesque. An honest worker being treated like a criminal, surrounded by people who watched everything with looks of confirmation, as if they finally had proof of what they always suspected. I knew she was trouble. I always thought she was strange. Now she'll see what's coming to her. The comments came from all sides, low but audible. Marcus felt a deep anger rising in his throat. It wasn't anger at the situation. It was anger at himself, for having taken so long, for having observed from a distance while all this was happening, for having believed that words and good intentions would be enough. But now was no longer the time to observe. It was time to act. Marcus took out his cell phone and called his company's lawyer. He quickly explained the situation and asked him to go immediately to the station. Then he called another contact, an investigative journalist who owed him a few favors. He asked him to investigate everything about Richard Vance, especially the recent contracts with the city. And then, as the police car drove away carrying Sarah, Marcus made the most important decision of his life. He wasn't just going to prove her innocence. He was going to expose everything, all the rot, the whole system, the entire sham, because now he understood that this wasn't about one wronged woman. It was about an entire system built to crush those who had no voice, and he had all the resources, all the contacts, and all the influence necessary to dismantle it, brick by brick. At the station, Sarah was interrogated for hours. She repeated the same story countless times. She found the envelope, thought it was important, and returned it to the front desk. But no one believed her. The doorman had denied everything. There were no cameras proving her version, and the board president, Richard Vance, had filed a formal complaint, alleging that important documents had been stolen. When they finally released Sarah, it was already night. She left the station with red eyes, not from crying, but from exhaustion. The lawyer Marcus had sent was waiting outside. "You're not going to be arrested," explained the lawyer, a young man with thin glasses. "But you will be charged with misappropriation. We will contest everything, of course, but the process will take time." Sarah just nodded. She didn't even have the strength to react anymore. She knew what this meant. She would lose her job. Her name would be tarnished. She would become an example of what they always said about her, the waste collector who couldn't resist the temptation to steal. Marcus was waiting outside as well. When Sarah came out, he approached her. "I'm so sorry." Sarah looked at him with an expression Marcus would never forget. It wasn't anger. It wasn't an accusation. It was just profound sadness. "You tried, sir, but you can't fight this. They always win." "Not this time," Marcus replied, his voice low but firm. "I promise you, not this time." Sarah gave a weak, strengthless smile and walked away. Marcus stood there watching her disappear into the darkness of the street, and at that moment, he made himself a promise. He was going to end this, once and for all, and he was going to do it in the most painful way possible for those who had set it all up, because now it was no longer about justice, it was about vengeance. Vengeance in the best sense of the word, the vengeance of proving that dignity is worth more than money, and that some human beings are too big to be crushed. The 15 days that followed were the most intense of Marcus's life. He transformed the private office of his home into a sort of investigation center. He hired a private detective to track all of Richard Vance's movements over the last 6 months. He asked his journalist friend to scour every contract, every bid, every suspicious bank transfer. And he himself spent hours reviewing the videos he had recorded, organizing screenshots of conversations in WhatsApp groups, and putting together a dossier that would be impossible to refute. Sarah, meanwhile, had been suspended from work. The news of the accusation spread quickly through the neighborhood. She became the subject of gossip in hair salons, gyms, and restaurants. That collector who stole documents. I always knew there was something wrong with her. That's why I never trust people like that. Marcus tried to get in touch a few times, but Sarah didn't answer. She was ashamed, not of him, but of the situation. She felt she had become a burden, a problem that a rich man was trying to solve out of pity, and that hurt more than any accusation. But Marcus didn't give up. He kept investigating. And the more he investigated, the more he discovered. He discovered that Richard Vance had a history of labor lawsuits won by employees he had humiliated. He discovered that he had been reported 3 times for workplace harassment, but always managed to hush everything up with multi-million-dollar settlements. He discovered that his company had won 5 consecutive city bids, all with overpriced values, all with suspicious documentation, and he also discovered that the envelope Sarah had found contained proof of all this. Falsified contracts, emails exchanged with politicians, spreadsheets with bribe amounts disguised as consulting fees. Richard had discarded it, thinking it would be destroyed along with the regular trash. He never imagined that an honest collector would return it. Marcus then understood the scale of the setup. Richard hadn't accused Sarah out of revenge. He had accused her out of necessity. If she handed those documents to the right authorities, he would fall. So the easiest solution was to destroy her credibility first, turn her into a thief. That way, even if she tried to report him, no one would believe her. It was perverse. It was calculated. And it was absolutely cowardly. Marcus needed a stage. It wasn't enough to just prove Sarah's innocence in a police station or a court case. That would be filed away, forgotten, hushed up. He needed something bigger, something that would expose everything at once in front of witnesses who couldn't pretend they didn't see. The opportunity appeared in the form of an invitation that arrived in the mail. Every year, the Beacon Hill Business Association held a charity gala in the Grand Ballroom of the Country Club of Boston. It was the most important social event in the neighborhood, where businessmen, politicians, and influential figures gathered to celebrate social projects, make donations, and pose for photos. Marcus had never liked those staged events, but he always attended out of social obligation. This time, however, he had a different reason. Richard Vance was one of the main sponsors of the event. He was going to be honored that night as Businessman of the Year. He would receive a plaque, give a speech, and be given a standing ovation by everyone present. Marcus smiled when he read the invitation. There was no better stage than that. He confirmed his attendance immediately. Afterward, he called the organizers and made a proposal. He wanted to give a presentation during the event, a presentation on social responsibility and human dignity. He said he had a special video to show, something that perfectly exemplified the values the event defended. The organizers were excited. Marcus Sterling was a heavy-hitter name. Having him as one of the speakers added prestige. They approved it without question. The night of the event arrived with a clear sky and mild temperature. The ballroom of the country club was impeccable. Crystal chandeliers, tables decorated with imported flower arrangements, waiters circulating with trays of champagne. The guests arrived in luxury cars, dressed in Italian suits and designer gowns. Everything there smelled of money, power, and well-rehearsed superficiality. Marcus arrived alone, wearing a sober navy blue suit. He greeted a few people, exchanged empty pleasantries, and accepted a glass of wine he didn't intend to drink. He was tense, but controlled. He had reviewed everything dozens of times. He knew every second of what was going to happen. He knew he couldn't make a mistake. Richard Vance was in the center of the room, surrounded by admirers. He laughed loudly, told stories, and received compliments. He wore an impeccable light gray suit and a gold watch that probably cost more than Sarah earned in 5 years. When he saw Marcus, he waved from afar with a politician's smile. Marcus returned it with a polite nod. Neither of them knew what the other was thinking, but soon everyone would know. The dinner began. Refined dishes, expensive wines, conversations about business and international travel. Marcus barely touched the food. He just waited. When it was time for the speeches and honors, the presenter went up to the stage and began calling the speakers. First was a local politician talking about the importance of supporting social projects, then a businesswoman telling about the charity actions her company promoted. Everyone received polite applause. Then it was Marcus's turn. Ladies and gentlemen, we now have a special presentation from businessman Marcus Sterling, who has prepared a video on social responsibility. Marcus, please. Marcus walked onto the stage to moderate applause. He took the microphone, took a deep breath, and began to speak. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. I'm not going to take much of your time. I just want to show a video I recorded over the last few months. It's about a woman who works here in the neighborhood, a waste collector named Sarah Miller. Some of you might recognize her. There were some murmurs in the audience. Some people exchanged confused looks. Others frowned, trying to understand where this was going. Before showing the video, I want to tell you something. This woman was recently accused of theft, accused by a person present here tonight. The accusation was false, but that didn't matter. She was publicly humiliated, interrogated, suspended from work, and had her name destroyed. And all this because she had the courage to return something she found in the trash, something that someone wanted to hide. The silence in the ballroom was now absolute. Marcus looked directly at Richard Vance, who had lost his smile and turned pale. But before we talk about that, I want you to see who this woman really is, not the version they invented about her. The real version, Marcus signaled to the technician. The ballroom lights went out and the screen behind the stage lit up. The video began. A sequence of images showed Sarah working through the streets of Beacon Hill, pushing her cart, collecting trash. But they also showed other things. They showed her returning a wallet that had fallen from a lady's purse. They showed her helping an elderly man cross the street. They showed her carefully separating recyclable materials, even when no one asked. They showed her giving water to a stray dog. They showed her smiling at a child waving from a window. The audience watched in silence, some already starting to understand what was happening. Then the tone of the video changed. The next images showed the humiliations. They showed a resident stepping away from Sarah as if she had a contagious disease. They showed a man intentionally spilling coffee on the ground near her. They showed security guards searching her backpack while a crowd watched. They showed a group of young people taking a photo of her secretly and laughing. They showed a shop employee shooing her away from the front of a window display. Some people in the audience began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Others looked to the sides, as if checking if anyone recognized them in the images. But the worst was yet to come. Marcus paused the video and spoke again. These scenes you just saw all happened here on the streets where many of you live, work, and move. And none of you did anything. None of you intervened. Because to you, she is invisible. She is disposable. She is less than human. The silence now was embarrassing. No one dared to breathe loudly. But I'm not finished yet, because there is a person in this room who went beyond a mission. A person who decided to destroy this woman's life on purpose. And I have proof of that. Marcus gave another signal. The video started playing again. This time it showed screenshots of conversations in private WhatsApp groups, cruel messages about Sarah, photos of her shared with humiliating comments, suggestions on how to invent accusations to force her out of the neighborhood, and then the image of the envelope appeared. The documents, the fraudulent contracts, the compromising emails, everything organized, captioned, impossible to deny. Richard Vance discarded these documents because they prove a corruption scheme involving multi-million-dollar bids. Sarah found them in the trash and returned them to his building's front desk, as any honest person would do. His response? Accuse her of theft, destroy her life, because it was easier to destroy a waste collector than to admit his own rot. Richard stood up from his chair, red with rage. This is defamation. I'm going to sue you. Sue me, Marcus replied, his voice calm but cutting. I have every single piece of this evidence authenticated. I have copies with lawyers, journalists, and with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You can sue me all you want, but it won't change the fact that everyone here now knows who you really are. The room exploded in murmurs. People stood up. Heated conversations started. Cell phones were taken out to record everything. Marcus let the chaos take over for a few seconds. Then he raised his hand asking for silence. But the true revelation of this night is not me, it's her. And that was when the ballroom doors opened, and Sarah Miller walked in. All heads turned toward the door. Sarah entered slowly, wearing a simple navy blue dress, her hair loose falling over her shoulders, without makeup, without jewelry, without any attempt to look like those people. She was exactly who she always was, and that at that moment was more powerful than any disguise. Marcus had called her 3 days earlier. He had told her about the plan, about the evidence, about the event. Sarah had hesitated. She didn't want to be a spectacle. She didn't want to become a symbol of anything. She just wanted to work in peace, live with dignity, and be left alone. But Marcus had said something that changed everything. This isn't about you. It's about all the Sarahs out there, all the people who are crushed every day because someone decided they are worth less. If you don't speak now, they will keep doing this, to you and to everyone who comes after. Sarah had understood. It wasn't about personal revenge. It was about breaking the silence. It was about showing that there are things that can no longer be accepted as normal, and that was why she was there. She walked down the central aisle of the ballroom, between the tables, while hundreds of eyes followed her. Some recognized her, others just found her strange. But everyone felt that something monumental was happening. Marcus stepped down from the stage and extended his hand to help her up. Sarah hesitated for a second, then accepted. When she reached the stage and stood in front of that entire audience, she felt her heart race. It wasn't from fear. It was from something bigger. It was from awareness. The awareness that this moment was going to define a lot of things. Marcus handed her the microphone. "It's yours," he said softly. Sarah held the microphone with both hands. She took a deep breath, and she began to speak. "Good evening. My name is Sarah Miller. I am a waste collector. I work every day on the streets of this neighborhood. I collect what you discard. I clean what you dirty. And for a long time I thought this was just work, that it was just survival. But now I understand it was more than that. It was a test to see how much I could stand being treated as if I didn't exist." The silence in the ballroom was so deep you could hear people's breathing. "I have been pushed, cursed, photographed secretly, searched in front of everyone, accused of theft and treated as if I were trash. All this while doing my job. All this while trying to live with dignity. And do you know what's saddest? It's not what they did to me, it's what they didn't do. No one helped. No one said anything. No one said it was wrong. Because to you I was invisible. I only existed when I was in the way." Some women in the audience began to lower their eyes. Others held back tears. Marcus saw faces red with shame, others with anger, others with pure guilt. But the worst wasn't that. The worst was when I tried to do the right thing, when I found an envelope with important documents and returned it. I could have thrown it away. I could have ignored it. But I returned it, because that's how I was raised, to be honest. To do the right thing even when no one is watching. And the reward? I was accused of theft. I was humiliated again. This time not just on the street, but in a police station. In front of officers, of police, of people who had already judged me before hearing my version. Sarah paused for a second. She wasn't crying. She wasn't going to cry. She wasn't going to give them that pleasure. I spent a long time of my life collecting trash from the streets, but in all that time I learned one thing. There is a lot of trash that isn't in the bins. It's in people. It's in the way they treat those who are different. It's in cruelty disguised as politeness. It's in the silence of those who see and do nothing. This is the hardest trash to clean because it's hidden behind expensive suits, imported perfumes, and fake smiles. There was a murmur in the audience. Some people shifted uncomfortably. Others were paralyzed, as if every word from Sarah were a direct blow. "You turned me into nothing." But I was never nothing. I was always someone. Someone with dreams. Someone with feelings. Someone who wakes up every day and does the best they can. I am not the waste collector you despise. I am Sarah, the woman who takes care of her sick mother at home, the woman who studies at night even after working all day, the woman who still believes it's possible to be happy even when the whole world seems to conspire against you. Sarah paused. She looked directly at Richard Vance, who was standing red, trembling with rage and shame. "And as for you, Mr. Vance, you tried to destroy me. You tried to erase my voice. You tried to turn me into a thief to hide that you were the thief. But it didn't work. Because I am not like you, I don't need to steal, lie, or destroy anyone to get what I want. I only need to keep being who I am. And that, sir, you will never be able to take from me." Richard tried to respond, but his voice came out shaky, inaudible. He knew that anything he said now would be destroyed. He knew he had lost. Not just his reputation, but something much bigger. He had lost the ability to pretend. Sarah looked back at the entire audience. "I didn't come here for revenge. I came to say that you can no longer pretend you don't see, that you can no longer treat people like me as if we were disposable. Because we are not. We are as human as you. And we deserve respect. Not out of charity, but by right." She handed the microphone back to Marcus, and the ballroom exploded in applause. It wasn't polite applause. It was emotional, loud applause, loaded with shame, admiration, and recognition. Some people stood up, then others, until the entire ballroom was standing, applauding that woman who had just given them the greatest lesson in dignity they would ever have. Richard Vance left the ballroom escorted by security, while cell phone cameras recorded everything. The next day, the video of Sarah's speech was in every newspaper, on every social media platform, in every conversation. The story spread like wildfire. And with it, the consequences. Richard lost his contracts with the city. He lost the presidency of the business association. He lost the respect he never deserved, and he ended up answering for corruption, fraud, and misuse of public funds. He wasn't imprisoned, because people like him rarely are, but he lost everything that mattered most to him, the power to pretend he was a dignified person. Marcus used all the visibility of the case to launch a scholarship program for the children of sanitation workers. He created respect policies in the companies he managed, with mandatory training on human dignity, and he used part of his own fortune to found a professional training center for people in vulnerable situations. But the most important thing wasn't what Marcus did. It was what Sarah achieved. She went back to work, but now with respect. Residents who used to ignore her began to greet her. Establishments that used to shoo her away now received her with kindness. And she, who always feared dreaming too big, finally began to believe she deserved more. With Marcus's support, Sarah went back to school. She finished high school and entered a social work program at university. She wanted to help other people who went through what she went through. She wanted to turn pain into purpose, and she did. 3 years later, Sarah graduated. On her graduation day, Marcus was in the audience applauding with pride, not as a patron, not as a savior, but as a friend. Because over those years, they had built something rare, a true friendship, based on mutual respect and the certainty that dignity has no social class. In her graduation speech, Sarah spoke about invisibility, about how the world tries to erase some people, but she also spoke about resilience, about how dignity is something no one can take from you unless you allow it. And when she finished, she received another round of applause, but this time it wasn't out of pity, it was out of admiration, because Sarah Miller had proven that a person's size is not measured by the money they have or the clothes they wear. It is measured by the strength they carry within, by the ability to keep standing when the whole world tries to knock you down, and by the courage to keep your heart clean even when everything around you is dirty. In the end, Sarah's story isn't just about a woman who was humiliated and managed to turn it around. It's about all the people who are invisible, all those who work hard but are treated as if they don't exist, all those who have dignity but are seen as inferior just because luck didn't give them opportunities. And it's about the choice each of us makes, the choice to see or to pretend we don't, the choice to respect or to despise, the choice to be truly human or just to appear so. Because at the end of the day, the biggest twist in this story wasn't when Sarah confronted those people in the ballroom. It was when she proved, with every gesture, with every word, with every day of honest work, that she was always bigger than all of them put together. And that dignity, unlike money, cannot be bought, it is earned. And once earned, no one can take it away. Dear listeners, we hope that Sarah Miller's story has deeply touched your hearts. If you were moved by this journey of dignity and overcoming, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment marked you the most. Every day we bring intense stories like this one, which reveal the deepest and truest side of the human soul. showing that a person's greatness is not measured by what they have,